If you're in the mood for some terrifying, true online dating stories straight from Reddit, then you've come to the right place. These are bone-chilling tales that will make you question everything. Do you have a creepy Reddit story to share? Send it to the email in the description, and it might be featured in a future video. We go through as many as we can, so yours could be next. Ready to be scared? Let's start with the tip of the iceberg. So, about a year ago, I moved into a new apartment, and it was my second year living alone. The city was relatively small, and I go to the local university there. One night, I was bored at home and decided to set up a Tinder date. I was talking to this apparent normal guy, and he asked if he could come over to my place. At the time, I did not see anything wrong with that, so I invited him and said I lived alone. About 20 minutes after the message, he arrives at my apartment wearing a black hoodie, big earphones, and he asked if there was security cameras in the hallways. I said there was a couple, and from that I could feel that I just made a mistake. He got into my apartment and we made out for like 10 minutes in my bed. Then he asked if he could try some of his kinks on me. At that moment, I was not thinking rationally anymore, and I said, yeah. He started biting my neck, then my chest, then my legs, and then he started with some really weird kinks. He started pinching me really hard in the between me down there, pulling my skin and just really digging his nails into my body. At this time, I was completely panicking and was asking him to stop, but he wouldn't. To top things off, he started choking me, and I couldn't get him off me because he was like this big buff dude. At last, he stopped and I rushed to the bathroom, saying I needed to pee. In no time, I grabbed a knife, locked myself in the bathroom, and called my other friends to come help me. I got out and told him to get the F off my apartment or I would call the police. To my surprise, he tried to attack me, but I had a knife in my hand and I started screaming. After hearing my doorbell, he quickly got dressed and rushed down the stairs. Please be careful when bringing strange people to your home. This shit scared me for life and I don't think I can do Tinder dates again. That was terrifying. Inviting someone in only to realize too late that you're trapped in your own home with a stranger who doesn't respect boundaries. That's a nightmare you don't just shake off. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where your instincts kicked in just in time, share your story below. Someone might need to hear it. Now let's move on to the next story. I told my friends what I'm about to tell you, and they urged me to share it here. It happened back in December, about a week before Christmas. I'm a 32-year-old guy currently using my GI Bill to go to college in a city in one of the mountain time zone states. I'm so busy with school and work, so I don't have time to go out and socialize often, so I have to rely a lot on the apps to go on dates. I matched with this really cute girl around my age, we had a good convo, and then we scheduled a date. It was at a bar restaurant not far for either of us to drive, so it was easy. She was very pretty in person and we got along great. During our conversation, I found out that she worked in a non-cop role at the police station, like a receptionist essentially. I also learned she had a roommate whom she said was out of town for the holidays. She added that she hated being alone because she had a crazy ex-boyfriend who stalked her. I was a little uneasy at that and told her as much. And she said he's harmless, so I kinda let it go. We had a few more drinks, and were there about another hour, and at her suggestion, she said we should go back to her place. And, I wasn't going to argue it. She was hot, lol. She then insisted on driving. I told her I was fine, and she said no, that I had been drinking, and she saw too many DUIs at her job. I got what she was saying, but I only had 2 gin tonics, and was fine, and again she insisted. I thought it was weird, but I didn't care. We went to her house and she walked up and just opened the door. She didn't unlock it. It was already open, which I found very odd because she said she had a stalker and that her roommate was gone. She started feeding her cat, and as she was doing that, I saw a bowl of cereal on the kitchen counter. I touched it, and it was still cold, like it hadn't been there for a while. The cereal wasn't soggy either. I asked her whose it was, and she hesitated and said she ate it as a snack before heading to the bar. It just didn't make sense, and before I could say anything, she just kissed me and put her arms around me seductively and said for me to take her to her room. Again, She was pretty hot, and I quit caring about the serial LOL. We started fooling around, and I went to close the curtains, and she told me to leave them open. A few minutes later, maybe 5, we were in bed, and my back was to the window, and she let out a huge gasp. A scared gasp. Her eyes were at the window. I turned around and saw someone in a hoodie, and they took off. I heard the steps running on her back deck. I immediately jumped up and ran out to make sure her doors were locked, and of course the front door wasn't. I ran to it and locked it, and right when I did, the door started banging. I went to open it because I was going to F the dude up, or try to, and she told me to just go back to bed with her. I screamed at her and asked if she was insane, and she told me he does this and goes away. And I asked her, "You know this is your ex?" And she said, "Yeah," and to not worry about it. At this point, he started banging on the side of the house on the other end, and she didn't seem at all scared and kept trying to get me to go back to her bed. I didn't want to call the cops because for all I know, this dude is a cop, or she'd know the cops that showed up and would take her side. I also couldn't just leave because my car was at the bar, and I was terrified. At this point, I started calling her out for the door not being locked, the serial. I openly called her a liar. She couldn't come up with any logical answers, and I had no idea what I was into. I shouldn't have done this, but my fight or flight was pretty much kicked in, and I told her, if this is a robbery or some kind of setup, I promise I will kill you both. I'm not a hard ass or anything, but my fear told me to let her know that no matter what it was, they'd have a fight on their hands. My thoughts of what were going to happen to me were all over the place. I ordered an Uber off my phone and didn't tell her. I just kept arguing with her and asking what was going on, hoping to just keep her talking and in the room. I stayed right next to the door so I could leave ASAP. Luckily, I never got my pants off, and my jacket and shoes were right by the door, so I was able to get dressed. The Uber showed up, and without saying anything, I just opened her door and ran out as fast as I could. I looked back at the door, and she was just standing there. It's only been a little over a month, but I honestly have no idea what the fuck I was into. I don't believe the story of just a girl with a crazy ex based off of the factors I told you. It feels like either a robbery or some weird fetishized cuck type thing. I don't know. Definitely something I'm very mad at myself for. I mean, I'm a 9-year Navy vet and allowed myself to get into a situation like that. I reported her account on the Uber ride back to the bar, and I told the bartender as well if they ever saw her in there again. That one gave me chills. A wide open door, fresh cereal in an empty house, and a so-called ex creeping in the dark? It felt less like a date and more like the setup to something twisted. The fact that he trusted his instincts, kept his cool, and found a way out might have saved his life. Alright, let's keep going. I met a guy on Tinder and we really started to hit it off. We'd been chatting for a few weeks and even discovered we had a few mutual friends. I was pretty intoxicated one night, was feeling social, and decided to call an Uber to his place. Once I got there, we talked outside for a while and ended up vibing even better in person. I opened up to him about my health problems, and he opened up to me about his older sister who had passed away from a similar condition to mine. I was curious about his sister, but I definitely didn't want to pry. We walked into his house, and it smelled like 1,000 dead rats were rotting under the floorboard. I was still pretty drunk, so I tried to forgive it because, hey, sometimes animals die under a house or in the walls, and there's nothing you can really do about it. I start to look around, and the whole house looks like a cluttered storage unit. He takes me to his room, which is seemingly normal. Kind of feminine, but that's cool, and we hook up. I ended up falling asleep there and woke up around 10 a.m. to the stench of death. I opened my eyes, feeling very sober, and started to look around the room. I noticed that only girls' clothes were hung in his closet. I start to assume I've possibly been cheated with. Then I see a giant black binder on his nightstand. When he woke up, I decided to jokingly ask him, "What's in that giant binder?" Turns out it was every single episode of Golden Girls printed out. He said he read it at work, and it's the only show he'll ever watch. Okay. I asked him what he did for work, something I definitely should have known by this point, and he dodged the question. I sat up and looked at the pillow I'd been cozily sleeping on. It had no pillowcase and was covered in what looked to be old blood. It looked like the blood had been coughed onto it. I started putting the unpleasant pieces together. I asked as sensitively as I could, "Hey, was this your sister's room? I noticed the clothes in the closet." He says, "Yeah, and this is her bed. I haven't changed or washed anything. It just makes me feel better to be in her bed. This is actually where I held her when she died, and you remind me so much of her. I really, really like you." And then casually tried to hook up with me, like he didn't just drop unsettling news. I felt immensely sorry for him, but needed to get out of there. I made some excuse and left. I decided to not entirely ghost him because of how bad I felt for him. He was clearly dealing with some really dark shit. We kept in contact for a few weeks, until I went on my Find My Friends app and noticed that he had clearly taken my phone while I was asleep that night and shared my location with himself. I called him and went off. This was not my first rodeo with a stalker type, and I was not dealing with it. He told me he couldn't believe I thought he would do that, and I'm being a really terrible person dumping him because his cat had recently died. I blocked him. After he said that about his cat, combined with his tendency to hold on to things, it really makes me wonder what that smell actually was. Let's hope not. And though I hope he gets help, let's not meet again. Edit. I found out from a mutual friend that his sister had passed away around 10 years prior to this. Edit 2. I forgot to mention this, but he was strangely turned on while I was using a nebulizer with my inhaler. He said his sister had one of those. I am 100% sure this turned him on. Edit 3. I'm pretty sure he uses Reddit, and I didn't know this post was going to get this popular, so I'm kind of scared now. But, oh well. Edit 4. Golden Girls was on the whole time I was over. Don't know why I forgot to mention this. That one is straight up creepy. A guy sleeping in his dead sister's unwashed bed surrounded by her clothes while casually trying to hook up? That's disturbing enough, but realizing he secretly tracked her location while she slept takes it to a whole other level. Don't click away now. You really don't want to miss the next one. Writing this so hopefully no one else has to deal with this flea of a human, it's going to be a wild ride. So grab your popcorn and get comfy. So back in June 2022, I met Wilton Wallace on Hinge. I'm from Victoria, Australia. He was from Queensland but was working in Victoria and was 28 at the time. I was 24. We hit it off, and within a day of chatting, he asked to meet me in the city for drinks. He seemed friendly and cute, so why not get dressed up and give him a chance? Funnily enough, my spidey senses were tingling already, but I just thought it was usual nerves of a first date. I should have trusted my gut, but he hadn't given me any red flags yet. He met me at Flinders Street Station. First impression was he dressed really nice, suit and long coat, clearly took pride in his looks. Instantly, he was super affectionate, way more than I'm used to. He kissed my cheek, picked me up, squeezed the crap of me, and we were hand in hand from the get-go. Although I was taken aback, he was of Brazilian descent, and I know their culture can be quite forward. I wasn't overly alarmed, but this was within 10 seconds of meeting. So we decide to go for drinks, and he recommends a very well-known fancy bar. I'm just a nurse, so way above my pay grade, but he said would like to cover the whole night. It became apparent very quickly he's super chivalrous, charming, and a sweet talker. It felt like a soppy 2000s rom-com. I can't lie. He was super open about his life, and because he was, so was I. We had so much in common, and everything just felt right. It makes me want to gag now I know the real him. If it feels too good to be true, it probably is. Basically, the life story he threw up all over me was that he was born in Brazil. His parents had a family business and were well off, but lost it somehow. Think he said his dad died? R.I.P. Dad. His mom couldn't afford to care for him and his 4 sisters alone, so she gave him up for adoption and he moved to Portugal. I guess he was the runt of the litter because she kept the 4 girls. So he grew up in Portugal from about 5 until he was 17 when he decided to move back to his biological mother. He said his Portuguese family were lovely, but incredibly religious, and he didn't like the constraints, arranged marriage, no boinking before marriage type deal. So at 17, he moves back to Brazil and builds his relationship with his biological mother, and eventually he decided to move to Australia. He moved over to study some aerodynamic bullshit degree for some career I don't give a flying F about. Fast forward 11 years to 2022, and now he works in Queensland as some manager for shipping companies and flies to and from Melbourne for work every few weeks. Now you're up to speed with that crock of shit. Let's get back to the date. I had a traumatic upbringing, neglect, poverty, raised by grandparents, and so on. So hearing all that really touched me, the man had me in the palm of his slimy hands. I felt at times he was cocky and had an ego on him, but he even mentioned he can come across cocky and reassured me that's how some people perceive him, but he's not at all. So clearly someone's pulled him up for being an arrogant twat before. The date is progressing and we're having huge DNMs. He was ticking so many boxes. We spoke about how I love to dance and always wanted to learn salsa. So he suggested a studio that does weekend night classes, but it had sold out. So he asked if I'd go back to his place just to hang out. I don't know what this man put in my drink, not literally, just FYI, but my common sense was gone. I told him I needed to go home before midnight and was only coming over to talk. Anyway, we get to his apartment and, like the scene from Crazy Stupid Love, he lights candles, puts on salsa music, pours a heavy glass of red for us, and asks if he can teach me how to salsa in his tiny living room. Like, was I Kate Hudson in How to Lose a Guy in 10 days? I oblige because my fanny flutters are in full control of my functioning at this point. We end up making out and things get hot and heavy, but I stuck to my guns and didn't let him past my chastity belt. Don't get me wrong, I have had one-night stands before, but I had turned a new leaf and my rule was now 3 dates minimum. Long story short, but not short at all, we ended up falling asleep together and I was fully clothed. How about that? We woke up the next morning and he took me out for breakfast before ordering me an Uber home. Keep in mind that was the one and only time I physically met him, and it was PG rated. A few days later, things were getting weird. He started making grandiose gestures and love bombing. Without asking, he bought me lingerie. He didn't know my size and had never seen me in lingerie. He bought me jewelry for my birthday just 1 week after we met, and then the grand prize, an all-inclusive holiday to Queensland. I said yes, because YOLO, right? Like, literally, I might die, but at least my tombstone would say I was living my best life. He told me on the trip we'd go to private restaurant his friend owns, a helicopter ride, and a cruise on a yacht, amongst a bunch of other completely insane things. He paid for the flights and told me not to bring lingerie because he had that covered. My red flag alarms were going off at this point, like, is he a sugar daddy? Or am I about to be trafficked in the lingerie and jewelry he just bought me? Think about it. Dude works for a shipping company. Perfect way to ship me off to the market. So at this point, my stomach is turning and I'm getting sus. I realized I hadn't really done much digging on him, and if I was going interstate with this schmoozy wet sock, I needed to know everything. I spent hours with my housemate investigating. His Facebook was on total lockdown. This was before you could lock your profile. And his Insta had no signs of family. He barely had any tagged photos with people, and the photos he did have were from years ago in Brazil. All the photos he had were just him solo and traveling, so I started questioning everything. Was his name even Wilton Wallace? Doesn't sound Brazilian or Portuguese. Sounds more like Donald Duck or Chuck E. Cheese to me. So we searched his number on my bank app using PayID. Lo and behold, Zao Vega dos Santoses comes up, changed for anonymity. I'm shitting bricks now, like, who the fuck is this toenail I've been wasting my time with? So I go deeper. I'm going through all of his Insta followers looking for any remnants of him. I find a mutual in the deep dark cave I've got myself into, and there it is. A group photo of him from around 2016, holding a Brazilian woman that looks about 35, and the comments mention a love you both, can't wait to see you two again. Couldn't confirm if they were married, but that's where my money was. I dig more and more to find who she is. I can't find anything, but I had a lead on what her name might be, so I head to Google and search both her name and his Vega dos. I'm a effing liar. Name. After sifting through countless pages I can't read because they're in Spanish and poorly translated, I find a settlement document. It was a civil dispute about a debt, but both their full names were there. To my delight, his full name in the case was Wilton Wallace Vega dos Santos. I don't blame him for going by the easiest of the 5 name, but one truth doesn't fix a truck of lies. So now I'm thinking I've gone mad and overthinking maybe he's just divorced and doesn't post a lot? Nope. Whilst doing our investigations, I asked him to send his passport so my friends had his details when I went to Queensland, to be safe. He sends me his passport after hours of waiting, and he had blacked out info and covered his face. Dumb F didn't cover his date of birth well enough though, because would you look at that, this absolute toad was born in 1986, making him 36. Now, I saw through his bullshit, but I wanted to flip the game for a little while. I had to do it for the plot. I confronted him about it. He made up some shit about how when he was registered in Portugal, they stuffed up the date. Didn't know a 5-year-old could look 13, but there you have it. Over the next few weeks, he kept canceling and changing Queensland plans days before each rescheduled flight. There was always another issue. I went along with it. I had no intention of going, but wanted to see his cunning plot come to fruition. Maybe it wasn't trafficking, maybe he was going to magically lose all his money and get cancer and need my help to survive. And then I get a message that broke the camel's back. His grandma in Portugal was sick, so he had to fly there ASAP. I literally laughed when I read it. I was super short and apathetic with him. Next day, grandma died of a stroke. Boo-hoo. Some may think my digging went a bit too far at this point, but I ended up messaging the woman from the Insta photo and legal document because I just had a horrible gut feeling there was more to all of this, and I was sick of the games. It definitely felt like I was crossing a line, but I had to know. She ended up messaging me back that she unfortunately did know him and wanted to tell me everything over the phone. What she told me blew my logical, lying, cheating scumbag I had ever had the displeasure of knowing. He had lied about it all. He was 36, born and raised by his mom and dad in Brazil his entire life. He had brothers, not 4 sisters. He never lived in Portugal. Grandma was still alive and kicking. He studied social work and was now studying to become a physiotherapist. Nothing to do with Arrow, whatever, the F. I don't even know what the shipping container place has to do with any of it. But he'd sent me Insta stories of him working there, so that's scary. He was the same charming, suave man to his ex-wife, who he married in Brazil, and they moved to Queensland shortly after. As soon as they arrived, he became financially and emotionally abusive to her and refused to get a job. She worked and paid for the bills, his social work degree, random business trips, and whatever else this scumbag pretended he did. Side note, please do not try and find her. She would like to remain anonymous as she is scared of her ex-husband and what he is capable of. After being in Queensland for 5 years, she got a message from a 24-year-old Australian girl. Same age I was at the time, and it turned out they'd been dating for 3 years. They'd met at uni, and he'd been using her to do all his university work. She was told the same life story as me, but the poor thing never questioned it. She believed the crap about his age too. She realized through a mutual uni friend that saw a photo of him and said she thought he was married. Thank F for that friend. So Wilton and his wife get divorced and the 24-year-old kicks him to the curb. But only a year later, another girl reaches out to his now ex-wife. Same story, 24-year-old Australian girl told the same bullshit life story and believed it. They'd been together 4 years, and he was using her to pay for his lifestyle and clothes. 2 years go by. His ex-wife just hoped he had finally come to his senses, but afraid not. I was the 3rd girl to reach out to her. My guess is he's still got a few girls on the go at a time. His plans probably kept changing because of them, and one of them probably pays for his plane trips every few weeks. F. The holiday jewelry and lingerie was probably some other woman's hard-earned money as well. Needless to say, I was furious. I ended up ghosting him because that's the best way to piss of a narcissist. He messaged me for weeks on text, Insta, WhatsApp, and FB. Eventually, I decided to give him a taste of his own medicine. I told him I knew some things and he needed to come clean. I never mentioned what or how I knew, but he said he'd be fully transparent and fly down to Melbourne to see me. He probably thought I knew 1% of the truth. I thought about actually seeing him and seeing what bullshit he'd come up with next, but I was done. I told him I was about 5 hours from the city, in a town that's so small there's only one train to get there a day. I said I couldn't pick him up from the airport, but he could stay a few days. I'd show him the real Australian country, and I'd drive him back to the airport at the end of his visit. So after catching 2.5-hour flight and sitting on a train for 5 hours to go to the middle of nowhere, I asked him to send a photo of where he was so I could find him. He'd actually done it. I was at home in my pajamas watching a movie, and he was at a train station in the rain, 5 hours away from the airport and stuck until the next day. Pure gold. I can only imagine how pissed he would have been. I sent him a message I had ready and waiting for that exact moment. I waited for a reply so I knew he got it, then blocked the piece of shit on everything and never looked back. So there you go. Stay safe out there and always trust your instincts. Years ago, I posted this on a Melbourne forum, and unfortunately, there were a lot of girls that had met him online or for a date, but thankfully, they all got the same vibes as me before it went too far. However, I was the only one crazy enough to find out who the scumbag really was. I just hope he hasn't been able to trick anymore since my run-in with him, and if they have been, I hope they find out the truth. If you somehow find this asshole on the streets or online, do as you please. Just please don't contact his ex-wife for her protection. Thanks for coming on this journey with me. That story was straight up wild. From a rom-com style first date to uncovering a tangled web of lies, manipulation, and a serial scammer with multiple lives, it felt like a real-life Netflix doc waiting to happen. The level of deceit this guy pulled off is terrifying. Make sure to stick around for the next one. You don't want to miss this. I was 21, recently became a police officer, and was also recently dumped, so my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old and new cop, I had the I'm invincible and I can take on anyone mentality. I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league female. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. So the night came. I was excited, and she seemed to be excited when I picked her up. She guided me to the field, and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then, the van started driving towards us and pulled up in front of us, almost close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car, and I'll go say hi. I grabbed my flashlight I had in the car and walked up. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what's going on and if he could back his car up a little bit. He was very polite, said he was the owner of the property, and said he didn't mean to scare us. He told me he's been having trouble with poachers on his property and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him we only came out to look at some stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that, told me to have a nice date, and drove away. After that, the girl was texting nonstop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car, and I moved it to a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. She hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. I immediately knew I was F-ed. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied, obviously. He then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun and to give them my money and truck, and I won't get hurt. Of course, with my I'm invincible mentality, I said no. She started to cry and saying they didn't want to hurt me. He then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told them I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and to lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911, tell them my name and badge number. I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field. While on the phone, they both fled. Again, stupid new cop, young guy mentality. I chased them. I took off after the man who ran into the woods around the field. I chased him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops and saw muzzle flash. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again, and had officers come to that location. Of course, the first officers to pull up was my sergeant and my field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding and didn't give me any shit about it at all. The most used words were dumbass and stupid effing rookie. I hopped in their car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they start getting shot at. They cleared the area and started looking in the van. They found meth right on the center console and searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out, and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale, looked horrified. I went to the back of the van where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front seat passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called for immediate backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out it wasn't blood. The plates had been stolen and the van was a reported stolen. I still get shit about the whole encounter, but luckily, no one got hurt. I will never use online dating again. Ever. That was horrifying. A setup like that, lured to a remote field under the pretense of stargazing, only to be ambushed by 2 people who clearly had worse intentions than robbery, is nightmare material. The fake property owner, the stolen van, the weapons, and the duct tape, it wasn't just a mugging. They were prepared for something much darker. If you thought this story was creepy, you're in for a surprise with the next one. This was 2015. I wasn't really actively looking, but would pop onto OkCupid every few weeks to see if anything interesting was in my inbox. Being female, I had a very active inbox. Sorry, guys. Noticed an email from an interesting, fairly local guy. Email was alright, asking about polyamory, which I don't mind talking about if the person asking is sincerely interested and respectful. We got to chatting. I had 0 romantic sexual interest, but thought this could be a friendship. After a few months of chatting, he found me on the Book of Faces, asked if it was okay to send an ad request, and I agreed. We'd been chatting, getting along well, and he seemed like a nice person. Little weird, but that's okay, because I'm a little weird myself. No big deal. We continued to chat here and there for about 2 years, send birthday greetings, just casual friendship. He has asked several times to meet, to hang out, etc. I've considered it, but at that time I was running my own business and working upward of 70 hours a week, plus maintaining my own home, raising my younger child, older is an adult, and trying to balance 2 partners and an extremely needy, demanding, workaholic client who had no boundaries. 11 p.m. phone calls occurred without a note of hesitation or remorse. On vacation? Ha 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 ha. So, meetup never occurred, but we kept in touch online. Late last year, a news story broke about a man and his girlfriend raping and murdering her young teenage daughter. I never connected the name until a friend contacted me and said, "Oh, I see you are friends with X. Did you see the news?" The news stories all use his full legal name, not his nickname, think Richard versus Dick, which is why I never connected the two. It was him. My then online friend of 2 years had beaten, raped, strangled, and then dismembered his girlfriend's teen daughter with the girlfriend's help. He's made several statements since then, stating that he's always had this rape/murder fantasy, and that this child was very sexual, and that it wasn't fun murdering her, as he apparently thought it would be. It still sends chills down my spine. I dodged a bullet. Big time. Be safe out there. You never know who is on the other side of that keyboard or phone call. And dude, let's not meet. That reveal was absolutely chilling. Imagine casually chatting with someone online for 2 years, thinking they're just a little odd, only to find out they committed one of the most horrific crimes you've ever seen on the news. It's the kind of realization that makes your stomach drop. Let's take a deep breath before we dive into the next one, as this is one you don't want to miss. Hi, I'm new to this site and I'm not sure if this is allowed in the category. If so, feel free to remove it. Anyways, I am currently starting to fear for my coworker's life. Here is the story. My coworker, I will call her Jane, is 33 years old, a virgin, and a very devout Christian. Her family is very strict and very religious. I'm not bashing on the religion in any way. I was raised a Christian myself. These people, though, they just seem to take their beliefs to a new extreme. Think of them as the Flanders from The Simpsons. I mentioned that Jane is a virgin because she has honestly never even had a boyfriend before. She's been on a few dating websites as of late, but she's usually very strict when it comes to the types of guys she would date. She can be kind of stuck up, which has gained her very little popularity. She recently meets a guy on OkCupid. Let's call him Miguel. Miguel claims to live in a bigger city than ours, an hour away. We are in the middle of nowhere in Kansas, and that he is 35 years old, also claims to be a virgin, and takes an interest in Jane. They chat for a while, and she's very excited. Once they establish a fondness for each other, he claims that he has a $250K in savings and a job at Cessna that pays $65 an hour. He has a nice apartment and 2 cars, one of which is a '69 Dodge Charger. Sounds too good to be true, right? We all agree. Everyone but her. They agree to meet for a first date, and he says he'll drive down here to see her. While driving down here, he claims to get into an accident on the interstate and is left hospitalized. Jane is devastated. The rest of us, who she was telling this to, all just assumed that he was lying to her and this was his way of getting out of the date and her finding out that he was scum. We didn't think there'd be any more communication afterwards. We were wrong. They continued talking, and shortly after getting out of the hospital, he claimed he was hit by a car crossing the street. His life apparently took a turn for the worst as he claimed he was laid off from Cessna, his apartment was burglarized, and all of his money and his other car were seized by the IRS due to a misunderstanding in his taxes from a few years back. Completely believable stories, right? Much to our dismay, Jane decides she doesn't care about these things and she is willing to continue talking to the man. He soon starts calling her daily and coming over once a week to visit her at work. At this point, we get to meet this guy, and he comes off as your typical loser with a beer belly who lays around on the couch all day, yelling at his woman to bring him a beer. Despite all of the money he claims to have, he wears clothes that are way too big for him, usually sweatpants and flip-flops. This earned him the nickname Flip-Flops amongst us at work. He has problems making eye contact with people when he talks to them and has the creepiest smile. We know right away that he doesn't seem very trustworthy. 3 weeks into their relationship, he shows up at our work and proposes to Jane. She gladly agrees, as we all shake our heads in disbelief. He tells us he got a new job working for Microsoft down in his city. We did our research. There is no Microsoft jobs over there, unless you're working and selling products at Best Buy. And he tells her that he's now seeing a therapist for his anger and jealousy issues. Many red flags are going off in our heads at this point, but Jane doesn't seem to mind any of it. He moves down here to be with her, after claiming that his family disowned him for wanting to marry a Christian. He claims they're all devotee Catholics, and that's the reason why she'll never get to meet them. As if this isn't ridiculous and over the top enough, things start to get creepier from here. He tells us that he has a new job for $25 an hour as the head engineer at Exide Manufacturing. The head of HR at Exide is actually a relative of a friend of ours, so we asked her about this. They never heard of this man, and the position he claims he has doesn't exist. We try to tell Jane about it, but she brushes off all of our comments and claims that we are thinking too much about it, or we're just jealous. He starts picking her up and dropping her off from work every single day, as well as picking her up for all of her lunches. She still believes he has a full-time job and that he's only doing this because of how much he loves her. We start to feel that he's just wanting to know where she is at all times. He asks the maintenance man at our work, after their first meeting, to be the best man at his wedding. This doesn't strike Jane as odd, because apparently Miguel is just untrusting of most people and has no friends of his own. They all want him for his money. Her parents loan him their spare van so he can use that to drive from now on. To our shock, her parents are already buying baby clothes and supplies for the couple. They are completely won over by the man. I think they're just blinded by the fact that their daughter finally has someone and will give them grandkids, which is a really sad thought. By this point, we've noticed her personality growing slightly more stressed and depressed as time goes on. Now, if you've read up to this point, you're probably thinking, oh, she's just another dumb girl who picked up a sleazeball guy who's milking her for all she's worth. And you're definitely not wrong. We all thought the same thing until she one day dropped this little bomb on us. He has just recently told her that he used to be special ops in the military, the Air Force to be exact, and they've decided that they want him to work for them again. They'll pay him $75K for working 3 days or 3 weeks or 3 months. The story always changes. Something she doesn't find suspicious at all. Testing military equipment that's too dangerous and could be life-threatening. He agrees to the work, and we all think he's copping out of the relationship. She then tells us that if she wishes to remain in contact with him, they'll have to get married as soon as possible, and she'll have to be prepared to move away with him. She explains that the military has been calling her and making stops at their house to explain to her that she'll have to marry him immediately, and she needs to be prepared to move to an undisclosed location at any given moment. From that location, she'll not be allowed to make any contact with friends or family, since all that is going on is top secret, and she has to prove that she can be trusted. Obviously, all of us are now alarmed, everyone but her and her family. They are delighted that she's with a military man and are proud that she gets to be a part of something much bigger. The rest of us are trying to figure out what on earth he can be plotting. Is she going to be hijacked into human trafficking? Is he going to murder her? One of our coworkers has just called the human trafficking hotline, and they think that this definitely sounds like something they've seen before. Unfortunately, they can't do anything about it until he actually makes a move and takes her. We're looking into contacting our local police to see if there's anything that can be done about this before she gets the phone call that tells her when they have to make their move. This is all so crazy we don't know what to expect or just what danger she's really in. Any thoughts would be appreciated, and thank you for reading. Update. Around the same time this story was originally posted, I think the same weekend, it turns out that Jane and Miguel had had a secret wedding ceremony at her church and were now married. Yes, there was a certificate and everything, full-blown legally binding marriage. None of his friends or family was present, only Jane's family and their pastor. She hid it from the rest of us for about a week. During these days of us being in the dark, we noticed a lot of mood shifts with her. One day, she would come in beaming and happy. The world was perfect for her. The next day, we could see the stress and tell something was wrong. A few of us also noted at the same time that both Jane's and Miguel's Facebook accounts had been deleted. He had a recently made account, no pictures of him, just pictures of his nice cars. He rarely used it, and all of his family on the account looked nothing like him. Some of you noticed in the comments that I'd mentioned him being blondish, haired, blue-eyed, and light, though dirty-looking skin. He claims he's Spanish, but all of his family was very distinctly Mexican-looking. We were afraid that he wasn't wanting her usual overly talkative self to give too much info about their situation, movements, and whereabouts when he kidnapped her. She confided in a coworker that he had a lot of outbursts, and though he hadn't been violent, he had suddenly become a different person. We tried warning her that he was dangerous, but she assured us that he was just insecure from having been cheated on in so many past relationships, and that it was nothing. It was sad to say she was definitely in an abusive relationship. The saddest part is seeing a situation like this and knowing that they can only help themselves at this point when they refuse to listen to everyone else. Shortly after these incidents, Jane wound up incredibly sick and had to get rushed to the ER. She had a high fever, but that is the extent that she told us at work. She didn't return for 3 days. We were terrified that he had tried to poison her or something to get rid of her. She didn't find it strange at all that he wasn't at work for the days she was sick at home. It was this time that word made it to our work that they had been married. She came back to work, seemed to be fine. Around this time, Miguel got a phone call from the military stating that he had to report to Fort Scott for top-secret weapons testing, and shortly after this, they would have to prepare for their big move. I dare you to look up Fort Scott, Kansas, and see if that seems like the kind of place that would do super dangerous, top-secret military weapons testing. I couldn't begin to tell you how many lies he's told that could be easily disproven by a simple Google search. She never questioned him about any of this. Unfortunately for him, the family van of hers that he'd been driving had broken down on his way to the test site, and her father had to come bring him home. By pure luck, the military called afterwards and told him that the equipment he was testing had exploded and killed a few men, so he was so lucky to have not turned up that day. They changed his plans, and his next top-secret mission would be next April, and it would be then that he and Jane would get to move. To continue from here, I will explain that before they were married, Jane was surprisingly good at keeping to her beliefs. Miguel had to live with another man from Jane's church and not with her, so as to keep their marriage bed sacred and to not be tempted. Miguel made it abundantly clear to Jane that he hated these arrangements and would try to start fights whenever it was made clear he wasn't going to get laid anytime soon. A week or so after the van broke down, a letter arrived at the house of the man Miguel had been staying with. It was inquiring about why he had missed the court date for giving away his parental rights back to his wife. Fortunately, this man from the church actually had common sense, so he met up with one of Jane's sisters to discuss what to do. Despite all of her family fully loving and supporting the couple, one of her sisters was actually hesitant and showed some doubts. There's a sign of intelligent life after all. Jane's sister used this information to find Miguel's wife on Facebook and talk to her, while the churchman ran a $30 background check on Miguel. A free background check had been run on him before, but nothing suspicious turned up. Surprisingly, this one also turned up nothing. He had to shell out $200 for a real background check that safely showed how much of what Miguel had said about himself was complete bull. Miguel had been married twice up to this point. He had 4 children with his first wife, and they both had given up custody of the kids, who were now living with Miguel's parents, the real reason that Jane was never going to meet his family. He had 1 kid with his most recent wife, and they had just gotten divorced. Their divorce was finalized a few days before Miguel and Jane's wedding. Sadly, this is all of the information that we coworkers were able to find out that turned up in the background check. No one has told us anything else. Jane's sister printed out copies of the marriage certificates, and they got the church together to show them to Jane. They were all able to convince her that Miguel was a lying dirtbag and helped kick him out of the house. He denied all of it until he was hauled away to a psych ward for suicide watch that night. He was released a few days later. After proving himself sane, Jane issued a no-contact order and has cut off all communication with him as she proceeds to get an annulment. Jane was devastated for about a week, but she's mostly over it now. Gee, it's almost as though she was only really in love with the thought of this man's money and valor, and not him himself. And the hardest part of the situation was dealing with the blow to her ego, knowing how stupid she had been. Sadly, this didn't last very long, as she now boldly tells everyone the tale of how strong she is for getting through all of this, and how brave she was. She assures everyone that Miguel was a master con artist, and he was able to fool everyone. Her family and church back her up in all of these claims, seeing as they were all fooled too. To this day, I don't think she really learned anything of value from this situation, just that she likes having everyone pat her on the back and tell her how brave she is. The only thing that Jane and her church really care about is that Miguel had lied about being married. To this day, I can't find out what his plans were once they disappeared in April. She is still holding no contact with him, and so I cannot find out this information. Jane's just too distraught over the fact that he wasn't the 35-year-old virgin of her dreams to care about any danger she could have been in. So I'm unsure if it will ever be answered if this man is a murderer or a human trafficker or whatever. All we know is that he is definitely a lazy bum, a deadbeat dad, and an abusive asshole. And stupid. Very, very stupid. We also believe that he genuinely believes all of his lies, since he was so insistent on all of them being true up until court time, as far as we can see. So definitely thinking some kind of mental problems in there. I haven't heard of the Dirty John podcasts before, but I'll definitely make time to listen. It does sound interesting. Maybe I can have her listen to see if she actually learns something from all of this. Upon talking to Jane yesterday, she now fancies herself an expert in the early signs of an abusive relationship, and is wanting to write a book on the subject. I think it's a great idea. There aren't really any books out there on abusive relationships, and I would love to be the voice of it, she says. Being a writer, I cringe at the very thought. I apologize if I sound bitter. I might just be more disgusted than bitter, but meh. That one reads like the plot of a psychological thriller. But the worst part is, it's real. A woman so sheltered, so desperate for love, she fell straight into the hands of a man who spun lies faster than anyone could fact-check them. Fake jobs, fake injuries, fake military contracts, and a top-secret plan to whisk her away from everyone and everything she knew. Well, that's it for these creepy Reddit stories. If they creeped you out, give it a like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more scary tales coming your way.